right, everybody, welcome back live at Drew's house. Another edition. Hope everybody is doing well out there. We're well into January now, cruising along. This is the hybrid version of the show. I've told you we're going to be doing some hybrid from the house, from the studio, all that sort of stuff. We bring back return guest Art Hogan, the financial expert in my life. Art Hogan, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Happy New Year. So good to see you.
Happy New Year. Up late. We both tried to watch a little bit of the football game. You made it through the whole football game last night, right?
Yeah, regretting that a little bit. That extra cup of coffee was definitely needed here this morning to get going.
I went to sleep. I thought Alabama was winning the national title. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, every 40 years or so, Georgia deserves to win one of these. So I'm super happy with the results.
40 years. Very good. All right. And Chief Market Analyst at National Securities. So we mentioned New Year. What's the outlook?
Well, I tell you, the outlook is going to be a little bumpy in the first quarter, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that this latest variant is getting a lot of people sick really quickly. When we look at the Omicron variant, it's very transmissible, so it's really delaying some of the improvements we thought we'd see already, meaning can't get enough people back to work, and especially in the travel and leisure space. Some people are delaying some of those decisions. But in manufacturing, you've got the same sort of thing that's happening. By the first quarter, we thought we'd see some of those supply chain disruptions smooth out. And unfortunately, whether it's China and their zero COVID policy or even US manufacturing, if you just have a lot of people that have to call in sick and be out for 5 days to quarantine, the logistical nightmares that we've been living through probably extend a little bit into the first quarter. That's the bad news. The good news is, clearly, this is moving so rapidly that we'll likely see a peak. We think we've peaked in parts of New York State already. So because it's so transmissible, it's going to be the variant that came upon us very fast and burns out really quickly. So we suspect that by the end of January, we won't be talking so much about this variant, and we'll be talking more about the reopening process yet again. And I think what's happened here is that sort of extension of the economic recovery gets pulled into 2022 when we get back out and do things and the kind of things we want to do. And I think that comes upon us a lot faster. To put some context around that, when we had the Delta variant that hit in February of last year, it was about 3 months before we were talking about reaching a peak of new case discovery and then rolling over. We suspect that in the month of January, we see a peak of new case discovery that rolls over and things move on in a pattern where we have less supply chain issues, more people entering the labor force, and certainly more people consuming goods and services.
It'll be nice to talk to you one day, actually, when we're not talking about reopening and all that in non-pandemic, but that's neither here nor there. That is the life at the moment. It is true. When you talk about the supply chain, is it me or it affects every industry? I mean, I can't think of an industry that it has not affected in some way.
100%, yeah, and it's one of those things that is the backside of globalization, right? So we very efficiently went to the best places to manufacture everything, and where there was the least friction. So whether it's the labor inputs or the natural resources, et cetera, and that's something that happened over the last 3 decades. And then all of a sudden a pandemic starts, and you find out just how tied you are to these fragile supply chains, and realize there's probably some changes that need to be made. The one that was the most shocking to me during the very beginning of the pandemic was that a good 90% of our generic drugs come from China, right? So that in and of itself, and they came from the place where this started in the Wuhan province. So that was a scary revelation. And then you draw that out, extrapolate that out to all sorts of other things. We don't know where we get the majority of our footwear, for example, out of Vietnam, and that's been a change over the last 10 years. But Vietnam has to close down for COVID, and all of a sudden you can't get the Nikes that you want. And so just play that out over things like semiconductors and how important they are to the automobile manufacturers. Play that out, over the basic materials that go into building a home, and the fact that there were shortages of all of those. So that's kind of the bad news, right? The flip side of that is all of that's going to get better. Likely gets better incrementally in the first quarter and much better in the second half. So much so that I would argue that we're going to see a bolus of inventory hitting shelves in the back half of this year. So as opposed to things being scarce, things are actually going to be plentiful. And I think that's going to be a change for us psychologically. We'll probably start seeing retailers having to be a little more promotional to empty shelves in the back half of this year. And that's one of our big calls. We think that's going to be important for not just the retailers, but the retailers that are in that off-price chain cycle segment. And so think about the Marshalls and TJ Maxx and Ross stores of the world. They're going to have more supply than they've ever thought about, because Macy's and Kohl's and all the department store chains are going to say, yeah, we over ordered because we thought we'd get nothing, and all of a sudden we're getting everything that we ordered, and now we have to either get promotional or put it in the discount chain.
Oh, I had not thought about that. All right, well, that's good. Is it like this? We're both Northeast guys here. The Boston life is like, I go to a restaurant and every single restaurant is struggling. Bartenders are short, waitresses are short. The person that, seats you, that's running around like crazy doing 3 jobs. Every restaurant I've been to has been like that. And, so restaurants are just a good example. Is it like that throughout the country right now, from your estimation? I mean, I had a friend who plays music down in Florida, and he says, oh, it's like a different world down here. Is it different in that regard, or are they seeing the same staff shortages?
Well, I would tell you this, there are certainly geographic differences, and we saw that throughout the pandemic. And I visited Florida in March of last year, and I thought I was in a different country. So their sort of approach to handling this pandemic was a lot different than it was in the Northeast, and certainly a lot different than it was in California. But I would say that the real, the base case nationally is that there's not enough labor supply in general, and for a lot of reasons. And companies are slowly having to do things that are very promotional to get people to come back to work, and whether it's sign-on bonuses, raising wages. But that will generally start to catch up with us. One of the things that we definitely saw was at the end of September, when we anniversaried some of the extended unemployment benefits, we saw a pickup in labor participation rates. And last month's report, we saw another pickup in labor participation rates. So for a lot of reasons, you're going to see people starting to begrudgingly get back in the labor force, and those shortages that we're seeing. And I don't know how many business people I've talked to that just said, my biggest concern is getting people to come to work and getting people here to work. And that's across everything, whether it's restaurants, travel and leisure, manufacturing, the service industries, et cetera. I think that gets better, but I think you're right. There were certainly notable geographic differences, and the Northeast was certainly a big part of that shortage. Around here, down in Duxbury and the Cape and Islands and whatnot, every restaurant picked that day or two that they just closed. They had to, right? Because they just couldn't staff full time for the whole week. And that still remains the case. It's kind of bizarre when you say, I'm going to go out to my favorite burger joint. It's like, oh no, we're always closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. What are you talking about? So hopefully we're going to sort of, by the summertime, get back to a place where those things feel a lot more normal.
That is fascinating. What's the, can you say in like a simplified way, because there's still some people just don't understand why certain people are not coming back to work. It's like, where's the money coming from? How do they live with this income that they were getting before? I know there's a lot to it. Is there a simplified way to saying this?
Yeah, well, I think that the simplest way to think about it, in the largest portion of people that have left things like the service industry, has been that necessity is the mother of invention. And what do I mean by that? I mean that individuals that perhaps had worked in the service industry their entire lives, all of a sudden saw their industry close, shut down, like we shut down the economy, but more so than anybody else, and depended on that, sort of living, sort of paycheck to paycheck, and had to recreate themselves. So we literally saw this reinvention and entrepreneurship like we've never seen in the history of the country, where people said, I need to reinvent myself and do something else. So that, whether that's some sort of gig economy type thing where you're actually going to go out and do something on your own, or actually start a business. Small and medium business startups are larger in terms of percentage of the overall population than we've seen in history. So all of that was, what do I do now that the thing that I've been doing for almost my entire adult life doesn't exist anymore? And those people aren't necessarily coming back. And so it's very much of I reinvented myself, so I'm not going back to what I used to do, and I'm just going to keep, plying this new trade and hope that works. That's one piece of the puzzle, and that's probably the largest piece. The other is demographics. People said, hey, my house is worth more than it was when I bought it. I've got a lot of savings in my 401k and my IRA. I'm going to retire. So there's that great resignation that happened. So that's both ends of the spectrum. So you have this baby boomer generation that decided to retire early. Those people left the workplace. And on the front end of that, you've got millennials that said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do something else, and are likely going to stick to that pattern. So it's going to sort of in the middle of both of those ends of the spectrum, where we just saw a lot of people leave what they had traditionally done, either working and now retired, or changing the way they ran their lives and doing something different. And that's hard for us to sort of model out. How do we figure out how that unwinds and how do we get back to a normal place? I think the biggest thing that we really need to reconsider as a country is legal immigration. That's one of the big things. We've got a low birth rate. That's not helping us, right? So we need more people born every day, and we need to have more legal immigrants to fill in all of those places in the middle that have sort of lost a lot of what traditionally would have been their employees.
Fascinating. All right, that was a great answer to that. Oh, look at this. I forgot to put this on. There we go. I think it's on. Perfect.
Hold on 1 second. I should put mine on too, don't you think?
Oh, wow, look at that. Absolutely, bring it on. All right. All right, there we go. Henry is all taken care of. He's outside. My guess now is the other dog will start barking at some point because I'm doing this at an awkward time for them. So they're just going to mess with us. But there we go. I got the on-air light that is now on. It's amazing that the show went on without it.
Yes.
Whoa!
On my side too. So we're both in business here.
That's unbelievable. Yours is a different take on it, but it's very nice. I like it.
Thank you. It was a gift a couple of years ago by a coworker, and I just love it. So it's part of my very fancy finished basement office here.
Yes. Well, this is a gift from my parents for Christmas. They thought it would be a good addition to the at-home version of the show. So
right.
Thank you, Mom and Dad. All right. Well, very good. That's a good way of explaining the worker shortage. So many people are kind of curious about that. We keep hearing about it, and so many people are like, "I had to keep working. How does that go?" But it's a good way of breaking it down. So outlook-wise, the wintertime is going to be the roughest. Kind of, this brings back deja vu compared to kind of last year when we were talking, right? I mean, as the Delta variant kicks in, all these problems kick in, but we eventually make it through and get out of it.
Yeah, I think that the important way to look at this, and we've seen this throughout the course of this entire pandemic, is with each new wave of case discovery, and then with each new variant, what is followed in the wake of that discovery has been a shorter and a shallower economic damage, right? So we've seen that, for example, the original pandemic that hit us, we virtually shut the economy down. And we know exactly how much economic damage was done, and we saw how much damage was done to the market. That's very well documented. And then each increasing new wave, when we got into the fall, we saw increased case discovery, and the 7-day average was above the 14-day average, which means things are increasing and getting worse. The economy slowed down a bit. We stopped doing things. We stopped going about our normal lives and doing, consuming goods and services, and particular services. And then just dial back to February of last year, we saw the Delta variant. We saw a pullback in economic activity, but it was much shorter and it was much shallower. And so we've gotten used to these new waves and these new variants such that it doesn't adversely affect our lives as much. I would argue that the Omicron variant has been the fastest, but it has had the least amount of economic activity damage, except for the fact that people are getting this in massive numbers, and just means that for a period of time, they have to stay away from work. And that is showing up. If you're going to have that many people getting this, there's going to be disruptions in services and products being delivered, but it's likely to be short, and therefore the economic damage is going to be shorter. So we think we get to the other side of this variant sometime in January. February looks a little bit better. As we head through March, we stop talking about that so much. We start talking about things that are picking up. What we really like to see, and this has been one of the things that's caused some of the inflation and certainly some of the supply chain disruptions, is people actually consuming services versus just goods. At the very beginning of this, you and I are probably going on Amazon every day and saying, well, I can't go out, so I'll buy a new guitar, or I'll get this book, or I'll, the service part of this, the travel and leisure, the actual attending of concerts, and all those things that we couldn't do will help sort of, when your consumption goes from just goods to a balance of goods and services, and maybe even more services, that takes a lot of pressure off that fragile supply chain that we have right now. And I think that's going to help too. So as we enter the summertime, we suspect a very strong consumer demand for things that they just haven't been able to consume over the course of the last 12 months.
All right. Art Hogan, Chief Market Strategist, National Securities. You mentioned music. We're both big music guys. My guy Springsteen, I just saw there were rumors of a tour this summer. He pushed it back another year. I think a lot of artists are already looking at that. What is the state of like the concert industry from that regard? I know you have some inside knowledge on that. Where do you see it going?
Well, it's interesting. So we sort of look at the data coming out of Live Nation, which helps us understand the state of play. And what's been interesting is when there are those performers and artists that have decided to say, okay, well, I'm going to wait a bit. Right behind them are people that are willing to say, yeah, you wait a bit, I'm jumping into this. We actually just saw this last week in a couple of different venues where people are saying, yeah, I'm not willing to go to this, and someone else is. I think it's going to be that sort of backing and filling and saying, okay, actually, we're going to have a much better season this year in terms of live music. Frankly, a lot of us can't wait, right? And quite honestly, that'll be a real sign that the economy is healing if we're able to get out and see live performance of things. We saw the same thing in sports at the very beginning, and then sports attendance has been up. What's amazing to me is on the other side of that is the number of rounds of golf that were played last year versus 2019. It is astonishing, and that likely is something that sticks with us for a little while too. So I think that's another positive. We look at this, so it's not just music, entertainment; it's all sorts of outdoor recreation that people have all of a sudden said, "I actually like this." And one of the things that's happened is, you and I are working from home today, right? So we have more time. You're not making that commute into the office. So there's more free time, and that free time is actually, a lot of it is finding its way into recreation and those things that we really like to do. So we actually inadvertently may have found a way to have a more enjoyable life at the end of this pandemic than we had before this pandemic, because we're realizing that the work-life balance is something that is a lot easier when you don't spend, fill in the blank number of hours commuting every week.
People found golf, so life is better. There was more to that answer, right? But no, I get it.
Unless you play golf like me, and then life is not so good.
Yes, I got my when the fade turns into a slice, right?
Right.
Happening right now. Talk about the Fed raising interest rates over time. That's kind of the big story of the day. You go to Bloomberg Business or whatever you want to read today. That is the Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is dealing with that right now at the Senate confirmation hearing. They're talking about it. What does this mean for us? Where do you see this going?
It means life is likely getting back to normal, and the economy doesn't need emergency level monetary policy. And we have some inflation we have to be concerned about, right? So the Fed's got two mandates, right? Full employment and stable prices. And those are the two things they focus on. Right now, they're focusing more on stable prices because obviously we have some inflationary pressures in the economy. And to do that, you really can't be at 0 to 25 basis points for the Fed funds rate. And you certainly can't be out in the open market making asset purchases on a monthly basis. So the first thing the Fed did is they pivoted. They said, listen, doesn't feel like it's transitory the way we would normally describe the word transitory in terms of inflation. So we're going to stop using that term. And oh, by the way, we're going to start tapering our monthly asset purchases, meaning they're not going to be in the open market buying fixed income assets. They're going to wind down that program in about March. And that means they won't be in the open market, increasing the size of their balance sheet. At that point in time, they'll likely raise rates once. Now, what's important to remember is that before the pandemic, the Fed funds rate was 2.5 heading to 3% pretty quickly. We're at 25 basis points, or a quarter of a percentage point right now. Even if we were to raise rates 4 times next year, that'd get us all the way to 1%. In an economy that we believe is going to grow above mean GDP levels and earnings that grow in low double digits for the S&P 500, the Fed funds rate should probably be a touch higher than that, especially if we're concerned about stubborn inflation. So what the Fed is trying to do is normalize monetary policy and move away from emergency policy. There are those that argue that they've been too slow to do that. I think that there are those that argue that they're moving too quickly now. But what the Fed is projecting right now is that they'll raise rates 3 times this year, which will get us up to a 1% Fed funds rate, which is certainly not going to be it's certainly going to be very accommodative still.
Okay, very good. So that's where we stand on that. 3 quick hitters for you here that I think people generally are curious about. I know in my neighborhood, I'm one of those people that kind of likes to look around and see what the value of housing is where I live. It just seems to keep going up and up. I mean, there's got to be a ceiling here at some point, right? Is there? I don't know.
Well, let's look at it like this. The millennial population won't reach their peak first-time home buying age for 2 years, right? So the biggest population in our economy that is actually purchasing homes won't even reach a peak for 2 years. So I think demand is outstripping supply. Supply has been
average. Is that like the average age millennial, or because
the average age is 33 years old for a first-time home buyer, which the peak of that demographic will happen in 2 years from now. So there's a long runway of demand. At the very same time, aging baby boomers like myself want to downsize from the product that they're in into that same product, that smaller single family home. So there's demand coming from both ends of the two different populations. Home builders have underbuilt single family homes since the great financial crisis. So we've underbuilt for the better part of 10 or 11 years. So home builders are trying really hard to deliver enough product. They can't because they can't get enough workers and the product costs too much. So the input costs are too high. So they're slowing down the pace at which they can sell homes. But I think that the drivers for the housing market are going to be with us for a while. What slows this down is just the supply constraints. So prices probably stay here. They're not going to go up another 30% on a year-over-year basis. That'll settle down. We'll get more people in the labor force. That'll help the supply of new homes. But it's certainly not something we're going to say, oh, this went up like this and now it has to fall apart, because the demand drivers behind it are with us for a while.
Okay. Another popular one right now is people, I don't know, I guess wintertime look to get away. People are jerks on airplanes, I've noticed. I'm sure you've seen that. I don't know what makes people think they can act that way on airplanes, but it has been tough to find people to work on airplanes, even a pilot shortage, if I remember correctly. The airline industry, where's that stand?
Yeah, again, supply so the two biggest inputs for an airline to run their business, the two biggest input cost-wise, jet fuel and human beings, right? And both of those have become more scarce this year. So the price of jet fuel has gone up. That hasn't been good. You've had a huge surge in demand, right? So they're playing catch up to have enough planes to put in the air, and then getting enough employees to come on. Now, I can't speak to why all of a sudden we've become rude as a nation, or at least rude as air travelers. There's that whole polarization around whether you should be wearing a mask or not, and conspiracy theories around vaccines and having to show cards and all that stuff. And I certainly think that plays a part of it, that whole frustration level of you can't tell me what to do. But I think that when I think about running an airline, it's capital intensive, so I have to buy more planes. There's a lot of money that goes into that. But the biggest cost to run an airline every day is jet fuel and getting human beings to run it. And that's where the problems have really been. And then throw in some bad weather. We've had some really bad weather, through the course of Thanksgiving and Christmas time, and then you get shut down for that. So it's a situation that likely gets better, not worse from here, but not as fast as we'd like to see it.
All right, and the last one on the quick hitters will be as we move towards hopefully eventually out of this pandemic at some point, the state of the American economy. We can, politically, we can make this about politics, and I'm sure you could get a good doom and gloom narrative if you wanted to. But the state of the American economy right now, strong, weak, medium, right where you want it to be. What do you think?
I think we're much stronger than any of us give us credit for. We're coming out of a pandemic, and it's amazing that we survived that without doing a lot of damage to the U.S. economy. We've got demand for employees like we haven't seen. So the jobs available to be filled is larger than the number of people that we have to fill them. We've got economic growth that's running above mean, meaning our average GDP growth rates last year and will again this year. And I think that's important. We've got corporate America and consumers with very strong balance sheets. So the consumer balance sheet is as strong as we've seen it post World War II. Corporate balance sheets are very strong. So I think you've got a much better economy than we think about or gets told. And I think that 2022 is going to be a spectacular year for the U.S. economy and certainly for corporate earnings. I just think we have to get through some of these bumps in the road, and we're going through one right now. I suspect by this time this summer, we'll be thinking about things in a much cheerier fashion than perhaps is the popular narrative right now.
All right, and since we're doing predictions, Art Hogan, Boston Red Sox baseball here. This a World Series team we're putting on the field next year, or what?
I really think they are. They came on so strong at the end of last year. So impressed with the guys on this team and how they've gelled together. Loved the end of the season, and we went a lot further last year than a lot of people gave us credit for. I think that momentum carries us into the springtime.
Did you, it's the first season. I don't know if it was the pandemic or just kind of being out of sorts or whatever. It's like the first season in since I can remember that I didn't get into Fenway multiple times, never mind at all. How was the experience, the baseball experience in the pandemic?
It's interesting. I'm glad you asked me that. So I went right from the very beginning when there was 25% occupancy, and that was bizarre. I mean, there was, it's all those things like don't have to wait in line to go to the bathroom, get a beer anytime I want, and nobody's kind of sitting around me. Then it went to 50% occupancy, again went. And then once it was fully open, I actually enjoyed it being fully open more than I did, sitting, with nobody near me at 25% occupancy. Absolutely loved it. Was able to get to 8 games this year, which is at or about my average. And absolutely, the 3 different experiences of that. I like it when it's full, and I like it when it's full of energy.
All right, good. So you got to see the whole thing. Art Hogan, I always enjoy our time together. This is good. Can you end with the Clash story again? I know you did last time on the show, but favorite concert was the Clash. I loved it. Go for it.
Yeah, I was a senior in college. They played at the University of Vermont. It was a must-see bit. We saw a lot of great concerts up in Vermont. We saw The Dead, some Marley, all sorts of great concerts. The Clash came, and very excited about it. We're at the show. After the show, we all go to this bar. My roommate is bartending there. Joe Strummer comes in. He's talking to the bartender, who's my roommate. We start talking, etc. Have a couple too many, invite him back to our apartment. He comes back to our apartment, and we were actually jamming. My roommate was an amazing musician who could play all sorts of instruments, stayed up until the wee hours of the morning, and probably one of the most exciting things that's happened to me in my life.
That is it. That would be an exciting one for anybody. My goodness, that's a great story. Great way to end it. You probably hear, I literally let the dog outside, and I think he broke through one of the doors because I usually can't hear him. So he's very angry at me. We need to go for a walk even on this cold day. You got dogs right around you now too, don't you?
The interns are right behind me, and if I turn the volume up and they hear your intern barking, they're going to start barking themselves.
Oh, I don't want to cause chaos at your house. That's okay. We won't do that. Enough dogs have entered the show here already. Mine have been pretty good, I will say, during this, but I don't know. I guess they're being a little odd today. But Art Hogan, man, always a pleasure. Appreciate the time and your straightforward, easy way of communicating tough topics. It's good stuff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Always great to catch up.
Absolutely. Happy New Year to you. Hopefully the family's doing okay through the virus, and health to all in the new year. All right.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.
Live at Drew's house, another edition.